Welcome back. We're running home stretch. This is Business Morning on Channels Television, and we've been speaking to Michael Adeleye. He is a human capital development expert, and he's been talking about the need to create jobs among the teeming unemployed youths in the country. Thank you, Michael, for still being a part of the program. Now, let's look at the issue of having to provide food on our table, food security. Food security, of course, reports around the world, we've seen the agriculture sector, the farming season in some countries do not exist because there is no rain, and some of them cannot till the ground to plant the crops. But in the country, what do you think we can do to be able to sustain food security in Nigeria? I think last year we had the floods in most part of the country. We saw what happened. The farmers had a tough time harvesting because of the challenge of flooding. But how can we protect ourselves from these things from happening?
I think numerous factors. First and foremost, I think, I was going to say this earlier, I think the government, I know we have the Ministry of Youth Development, but I think the government should look critically in bringing in the Youth Development Ministry together with training and employment. So we should have the Ministry of Youth Development, training and employment combined together. Because, you see, that is one key. Another key is a natural emergency sector as well. That's another key area. Now, the Ministry of Education is another key area. Then of course, the Ministry of Agriculture. Now, if you look at all these 4 or 5 ministries coming together, if they work hand in hand, now, talking about ultimately the agricultural sector, how can we protect ourselves to have the food on our table without having to perhaps run helter-skelter when we have all this sort of disaster that happened in the last few months? The awareness is not there. If we have the awareness in there, then of course, and all this ministry working together, the youth are well informed. They know exactly what to do and when to do it, right? The Minister of Agriculture is actually taking their own step, right? Promoting agriculture to the youth as well, okay? The emergency sector are all also there, giving the information, proactive and real-time information to the youth as well. Now, if there's any disaster, if anything that takes place, like the one that we've experienced in the last few months, of course, now all these agencies working together hand in hand will have been able to provide information, the awareness beforehand, before they happen. So there will be a protective measure in place. The Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Youth Development and what's it called, and employment, working together, they will have a well-structured, informative system in place, whereby when we have a disaster that's going to affect the food on our table, they'll have been able to proactively plan ahead of it and guard against them.
Okay, I want us to look at something very critical at this point, having to do with budget for the agriculture sector. I don't know how the latest figures right now, but do you think that we're doing enough in having to earmark, set aside some amount of money for our agriculture sector? We've seen other parts of the economy of the country, other parts of the country actually trying to clamor for increase in budgeting. But do you think we're doing enough in that sector?
Unfortunately, I don't have the figure right here with me, what the budget is in this sector. But I think ultimately, with the progress we're having in this sector and how the this sector itself is moving the economy, I think the government will be looking into putting more money where their mouth is, of course, to be able to promote further the progress of the sector, the way we're going forward now economically.
Okay, let's get back to the issue of funding. And I know that there's been various funds set aside by the Central Bank of Nigeria to help boost agriculture in the country. And at the same summit held, because we always make a reference to that summit, because that was the key issue discussed, there's been having to reduce interest rate for farmers.
Yes.
Do you think that there should be other kinds of account, other kinds of funds being set aside to help boost this sector? And in addition to that, having to attract young people as well, because we need to attract these people.
Of course.
Because for a young graduate, we all want to make money. Perhaps we've been told to also wait for our time, but we want to see the prospects in anything we want to go into. But how can that be done to make it more attractive, to create funding, which is very important for our young people?
Again, the Ministry of Youth Development has to bring in that awareness. Now, if the government, let's even assume that the government create funds, for that department, a huge fund. Now, the fund could be sitting down there, lying fallow, without being utilized. Because when the people that are meant to utilize the funds are not well informed how to utilize the funds and how to go about accessing the funds, then of course it will serve no purpose. So ultimately, the youth need to be informed, by this sector, this ministry, who will actually engage themselves very closely with the youth in this country to tell them, this is what the government has in place for you. These are the programs we have in place for you. These are the training we have in place for you. And if you go into it, encouraging them to go into it, this will be the end benefit results if you go into it. So bringing all these things together will encourage our youth to actually go in there. Now the funding, again, like we mentioned, is quite key. Now we have what we call excess crude account fund, right, from the sales of our crude and so on and so forth. I think we should have something like that and replicate. And
for the agriculture sector.
Of course. Now, like we mentioned earlier, that if we have a natural disaster, there should be a fund set aside that when this happens, you could have 100 commercial farmers, hoping to reap what they've sown in the next 1 month, and all of a sudden disaster strikes, right, and just destroy the whole thing. If there is no fund set aside, then that will be the end of the dream of this farm. But if they have this excess fund account created for this agricultural sector, when that happens, it's like an insurance. Okay, it's like an insurance for them, even though they're going to have the insurance for their business, but it's like a governmental insurance for them as well. So they'll be well assured that if anything happens to them, they're well covered and being supported by a mechanism from the government.
Well, in relation to that, the Vice President, this may not be from the excess credit account though, the Vice President, Namar December, actually said that the government has set aside 15 billion naira for farmers for the 2013 planting season. Do you think this may be some kind of good news to attract these young people who we think can help drive this sector?
It's a good news, but again, have you actually been able to calculate if that fund is actually enough or over budget or whatsoever? Because it's one thing to it's a good gesture, don't get me wrong, 15 billion is a lot of money, but will that be sustainable if anything occurs within that sector that requires a huge fund? If you set up a fund,
something to start with.
Of course.
It's actually for the 2013 planting season.
Okay.
Perhaps other monies will be released by the government as time goes on.
Right. So, in that respect, I think it's a good gesture. For that money to be given out by the government to support that.
So, how do we get all the other parts of government? You mentioned the various ministries that should work together. Not just the agriculture ministry.
No.
So how do we get them to put heads together and ensure that we drive this dream?
If we have the right people in place, if we have the right people that have visionary, we don't just want to have ministers or head of departments who doesn't have the vision of what is meant to be done in that department. Okay, like I said, I'm not here to be commending people, but like I said earlier, I commend people like someone like the Honorable Minister for Agriculture, who actually gets his hand dirty at all times to make sure that things is actually working the way it should be. The Ministry of Education has got to do with the youth, right? The Ministry of Youth, like I said, we should have youth development, training and employment combined together, are very key to youth as well. The Ministry of Agriculture as well, which is driving this force now, is linked to the youth as well. Now, these are some of the ministries that should be working together, because ultimately the youth are the key driver of this economy. Now, if all this ministry works together and they have a roadmap that this is what we want to do, you put it on the table, the other one puts his on the table, and they now walk around the clock to actually ensure that they have a roadmap as a visionary team, then of course we'll be moving to where we're supposed to be.
Just before I let you go, I know that it's quite very good for us to put up a policy or whatever it is that we want to do as a nation. But do you think that we've put in place the necessary check and balance to ensure that these things get done within a period of time? Because while we are trying to plan economically, politics come into play sometimes, and that can disrupt a whole lot of things. But how do you think we can help keep this dream alive and ensure that our country realizes every goal that it has set, not just in the agriculture sector, but in every other area?
If we need to achieve a 2020 goal, which is the government agenda, I mean, government comes, government goes. I think I've mentioned in the air, I think about last year, that most of the policy that we implement in this country, I mean, gets washed away by another government. If another government comes in now, they're going to cancel everything, start another policy. So it's not in the interest of Nigerians when you do all this. It's for their own selfish interest.
So we should look at building institutions.
Absolutely.
And not just building people.
There should be continuity.
Not just people, but institutions that will last, that would leave us while we're
Of course, regardless of which government is in power. That policy should be, there should be continuity on that policy that we should be obviously stepping on and moving forward.
What about the check and balance? How do we go back? How often should we go back and check what we've done in the past 3 years, for instance? Do you think we've realized our dreams? Do you think we've been able to make our marks as a country? That is another challenge that we usually face.
I think that would be an assignment for all the pressure groups that we have in this country. Because you can't really be, the government can't be a watchdog. They can't be a watchdog to themselves. We should have pressure groups. And of course, ultimately, we have opposition parties as well, political parties who actually access checks and balances, but ultimately I think the pressures grew from the government, from the education side of things, from the NGOs and so on and so forth. They should keep a very close eye look on every policy that the government has implemented and to see how they're being executed as well. If there's any deficiency in there, then they should cry out.
Oh, I think we have to leave it at that. We're running out of time. Thank you, Michael Adeleye has been my guest. He is a human capital development expert, and we have been talking agriculture among the young people, among the young graduates in the country. And just before we go, let's take you through the numbers coming from the money markets. We've seen interbank lending deepen across board owing to maturing bills. Just yesterday, over 147 billion naira worth of bills, especially under the open market operation window of the market, actually matured, and that has been regarded as one of the reasons why this numbers dropped. The core money was at 13.75% from 21.5% specifically 2 days ago. So it's in a very wide gap between two trading sessions. Okay, we saw the 7-day money at 21.7% 2 days ago, and that dropped to 14% after the matured bills. Okay, the banks and the discount houses traded the OBB instrument above 13%. We mentioned earlier on 147 billion naira worth of OMI bills matured in the money market, and that could also impact the market further next week. Of course, we're still expecting more maturity to take place at the money market, and of course more sales of treasury bills by the central bank. Don't forget the OMO instrument is one of the ways the Central Bank of Nigeria mops up excess liquidity from our economy. Okay, that's where we wrap up the program. We want to thank everyone out there for watching. We hope you join us again same time on Monday. I am Bolaji.